If you don't submit to control, if you're a radical, you're less likely to be loved. You're not fitting in with society. You're viewed as an outsider. There's a lot of social prohibitions about the outsider and the person who's going to upset things.
From the time we're very young, we're taught to, worship authority basically because that's our key to survival as young children. But as adults, we never go through the rites of passage that tell us how to methodically think for ourselves, and thus we're always in a state of extended adolescence.
Well, we take all this stuff, whether it's the television or it's the enculturation, the schoolyards, the teachers, we take this whole system, we put it into our unconscious mind. And it is the GIGO that comes out, garbage in, garbage out. We simply, in that computer language, have harnessed our own power by accepting all these beliefs as though they are factual, whether it's the flat earth of Columbus, or it's the idea that I'm not good enough to be or to do something I've dreamed to do.
To the degree that the individual loses a sense of what freedom really means for himself, mind control is working. This is the constant battle and the struggle. What does my freedom mean to me? What is it? How deep does it go? How far-reaching is it?
Individuals come already with their rights. They're born with their rights. They're inherent, they're hardwired, they're hardware.
It's tragic. They've lost their sense of the importance of the individual, each individual. We're not animals. We're individuals. We're created in the image of God.
And so what you have is everybody's born into this control structure. Everybody's born into authority. Everyone's born into this situation. But just because you have an authority making decisions for you at some point when you're very young, too young to take care of yourself, doesn't mean you should always cater to authority your whole life.
Fatalism, defeatism, what Bob Marley called mental slavery. That's a huge thing that he would sing about. How do we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery? Have we moved to that point of such slavery that we're too far gone?
And just kind of letting it all flow by and being apathetic about it just gets you in a position of being controlled.
The works of The Art of War talk about the fact that if you can understand your enemy so well to the level of where you can psych him out, basically defeat him before you put one boot on the battlefield, you've become a true master of your domain.
The Greek author Plato embedded several key characteristics of ruling groups in his monumental work known as The Republic. Therein, he introduces the term cybernetics as a description of steering the ship of state, emphasizing crowd control. Plato memorialized the essence of the scenario used to control individuals to this day, to make them part of the group or state. This is famously known as the allegory of the cave, a useful strategy which is emblematic of the history of mind control.
The idea of cybernetics first shows up in Plato's Republic, I believe it's book 6, and in the Greek original text it's read kybernetes, but you can easily discern how this word tied into cybernetics, the control of not only nations, but how the making of individuals into the collective that forms nations came about.
As we've moved through history, every great leader has had to understand the potential of information, the potential of speech, the potential of words, the potential of books.
What is a citizen, if not someone willingly or unwillingly participating in the machinations of the state? How would we acquire the habits of citizenship without stimulus from the state and our response to it?
Attention! Attention! This is your beloved leader, Og the Exalted. There will be a special Giant Joy rally today at Og Memorial Stadium. Please.
In an attempt to assist the state, a 14th century Italian named Niccolo Machiavelli crafted several books intended to help the ruling elite dominate their subjects with the most effective psychological warfare techniques available to the world at that time.
And he was trying to convert the Medici family into hiring him to provide political advice. Conspiracy is the story of history. It's the story of plunderers taking care of people who produce. They claim to take care of them through government, which doesn't give you anything, it doesn't take away first. So it's not creating something out of nothing. It's very real what they're doing. They're taking your rights or taking some people's rights and adding more to someone else's rights.
Concurrent to Machiavelli's efforts, the consequences of tyranny were sowing the seeds of liberty throughout Europe, with authors like Etienne de la Boétie of France leading individuals to consider their situations and discover effective means to achieving liberty for all.
So this whole idea of Machiavelli telling the ruling elite how to do this in a more efficient and effective manner without people directly knowing about it. But his mistake is that these books get out there and other people start to read these books because it's not just the ruling elite. This starts to have an influence in Europe. You've got a character named Etienne de la Boétie who writes a discourse on voluntary servitude. And basically what de la Boétie does is he shows you that everything that Machiavelli told the ruling elite about how to control you is undone when you understand it to the nuts and bolts level, where you can then withdraw your consent, and that only then are you free.
We control you. We control your mind. We make you believe you have no creative power. We make you forget you have imagination, which is the core capability from which you can invent your own reality.
The myriad components of collectivism combine to form a comprehensive system for transforming the individual into a cog within the machinery of the state. The first step is to remove self-reliance, thus creating dependence on the state or collective. The next step is to create a motivation based on fear of scarcity, as opposed to creativity and productivity. Remove the systems of autonomy, creativity, and self-teaching, which help create individuality in the first place, and the void is filled by the will of the collective. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the mind is no different. Innovative and enigmatic German philosopher of the 19th century, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, observed that human history could be manipulated to create a contrived outcome. Hegel's essential observations of the methods by which history may be authored by a small group translate into a world in which an individual's choices may be engineered away from his needs.
How to engineer the opinion of the American people so that they would fully endorse, not only endorse, but demand a war.
There's another one. Another plane just hit. Oh my God, another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion.
I just want to spend a few minutes here. Going over just a couple of examples in the last couple thousand years of elites using terrorism that they perpetrate against themselves as an excuse, as a pretext for war, as an excuse to declare war on their own people or on a foreign enemy, to consolidate and expand their power. It's called problem, reaction, solution. Create a crisis, create fear, and tell the people, give up your liberties, get behind this war, submit to the emperor, cheerlead this expansion of tyranny, and we'll protect you. And that's the siren song of dictators. It's a fraud. It's a lie. It goes against every example of history we have. And for those of you that are doubting that elites can be carrying out these type of dastardly deeds, you just don't know history. And you don't understand that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that there is truly nothing new under the sun. Way back, ladies and gentlemen, almost 2,000 years ago, Nero, the degenerate, inbred emperor of Rome, set the city ablaze so that he could blame it on the Christians, who were becoming a very popular minority in the city. He was having trouble persecuting them. The more Christians he persecuted, the more Christians popped up. The more people were converted. Well, he had a very successful purge in the weeks and months after he set the city on fire. And before he committed suicide, he admitted that he had set the city ablaze. And then, of course, we have some more modern examples of this. In 1898, William McKinley's Navy blew up the Maine in Havana Harbor as a pretext for war with Spain. And the United States expanded its control and grabbed dozens of islands, coaling stations in the Pacific. And now you read the history books and declassified documents, U.S. government documents, they admit that the U.S. government blew up its own ship and blamed it on the Spanish.
Seines Festes Blutes fühlen und dieses Wissen zur Führung der Nation erhoben hat und entschlossen ist, diese Führung zu behalten, wahrzunehmen und nicht erst abzugeben.
We have Adolf Hitler in 1933, just a few months after being elected, on February 27th, firebombing his own Capitol building, the Reichstag, and blaming it on his political enemies and declaring a police state crackdown for the Reich's security and announcing fatherland security, the equivalent of homeland security, and a new national police and an end of local control. Everything we're seeing, I'm about to show you the documents that's happening in 2002 into 2003. Then, of course, we have Roosevelt allowing the Japanese to attack Pearl Harbor back on December 7th to get us into the war. At least Roosevelt didn't attack Pearl Harbor himself, but they definitely had prior knowledge. 12 days before, it's a declassified public document, Roosevelt's White House had received the communique that Admiral Yamamoto would attack on the morning of December 7th and deal a death blow. In fact, U.S. naval forces, destroyers, sunk 5 submarines just a mile outside Pearl Harbor. They're at the mouth of the harbor. Depth charged them, sunk them. They've even recovered one of them at the bottom. And when they radioed the base camp and said, we're under attack, they were told to stand down. And the rest of the base was not put on alert. While a mile outside the harbor, multiple submarines are being sunk. This is all confirmed, declassified public information. Think about that. The U.S. Navy, a mile outside Pearl Harbor, depth charging and sinking submarines and confirming that Japanese submarines were attacking and entering the harbor, and still the base sat there and no one put out an alert. Everybody continued with their day off. Think about that. Here's another example. Confirmed, ladies and gentlemen, the headline from the Scotsman, U.S. prisoners claim Roosevelt left them in the Philippines deliberately. You read on deeper into the article, the prisoners don't claim. The documents have been declassified. The Roosevelt White House, and Churchill, Winston Churchill was aware of it as well, ordered the U.S. Navy, Roosevelt did, not to allow 7,000 American civilians to evacuate the Philippines despite the fact that they had over a month to do it. There were empty naval ships leaving full of Navy and Marine Corps personnel. But men, women, and children were left on the island. And it turns out from these documents that have now been declassified, and I interviewed the still living victim's lawyer, Anthony D'Amato, on my syndicated radio show. The documents say, prepare to leave civilians there to be captured. So, the old government documents. So, think about this, 7,000 Americans. So they could use it as wartime propaganda. Oh, look, the Japanese have our women and children. And many of these women were raped and killed. They had their heads cut off. Children were killed. The men were killed. I've talked to Vietnam veterans who were on board these ships. Gulf of Tonkin incident might not have occurred. I love these headlines. This is out of the San Antonio Express News. Folks, it actually came out back in 1964 on San Diego television. It just didn't get national coverage, that this was a fake incident. People knew back in the 60s. Again, I've talked to Vietnam veterans who were on those ships. The Vietnamese did not attack our ships. And I'm no fan of the communist Vietnamese. The point is, it is a historical fact, ladies and gentlemen, that our ships were not actually even attacked by the Vietnamese, by the communists. But again, there's this pretext for war, and 58,000 Americans died. And by the way, our own government wouldn't allow our jets and aircraft to bomb the North. And the documents have now been declassified on that because the war was about getting our servicemen addicted to heroin, and it was about dredging the port there, and it was about selling weapons. It was a war for profit and a war to demoralize the American people. And another example of problem, reaction, solution, and there are just thousands of these. We're going to go over a couple more. I see these reports all the time. Most notorious German post-war neo-Nazi was an MI6 agent. That's the MI6 is the equivalent of the British CIA. They're outward-focused intelligence agencies. And the most notorious neo-Nazi who almost got Nazis elected in the late 1960s was an MI6 agent. And just a few weeks ago, I saw other reports, the modern neo-Nazi leaders out there promoting and creating all of this to destabilize Germany so the government has an excuse to come in with more police state to deal with this problem and an excuse to attack their free speech and to get rid of average Germans' free speech on other issues. They're now using the threat of the neo-Nazis, and every time I look into it, every leader of these groups, even in this country, they caught the FBI Cretan Klan groups back in 1998 trying to get them to blow up a chemical plant in Fort Worth, Texas. They won a bum steer award in Texas Monthly Magazine. The FBI did, which is a huge insult for criminally creating a Klan group. It's the same thing. They create the crisis, they create the threat or the perceived threat to scare you into submission. Most notorious German post-war neo-Nazi was an MI6 agent. What more do you need? Here's another one. This is the Associated Press. Germany intercepts Israeli arms bound for Iran. So the Israelis have been caught selling nuclear weapons components, cruise missile parts, F-16s, radar, everything to the Iranians, who are not friends, folks, but they don't care. See, World War III will only expand the globalists and their power. Another article on that, this from the Associated Press. Germany intercepts Israeli arms bound for Iran. Disgusting, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're doubting the government would do evil things to you, think about all the things they've done. This is not our republic, folks. This is not our legitimate government. Our government has been hijacked. Virginia governor apologizes for eugenics law. What did the government do? United Press International. This is just one state with tens of thousands of people being sterilized from 1924 to 1979. If you came from a single-parent home and made under a B+, they would send by men in white lab coats with the police with no warrant, no conviction, no jury, no probable, no nothing, folks. This is the tyranny. This is how long our rights have been violated. It's always some new evil. We get rid of slavery, 10 other evils pop up. They would take them women, mainly women, and sterilize them. Medical students would sterilize them. Hysterectomies, cutting out the uterus of these young girls. Black, white, Hispanic, didn't matter. And then we exposed that evil. It was going on nationwide, the hundreds of thousands, the tens of thousands just in Virginia alone, and in all 50 states, right up until 1970s, 1979. Brutal stuff. Castrating men, you name it. Margaret Sanger, this big liberal, gave awards to Hitler, got awards from Hitler. How was that liberal? See, these are just terms to confuse you, folks. These folks are elitist command and controllers. They're despots. Don't let them confuse you with different phony political terms. Now they call it bioethics, and it's still going on. And Child Protective Services grabs innocent children from innocent parents all the time, just because they want to break up families and get hundreds of thousands of federal dollars from it. There's all these evils going on. So many evils, I couldn't cover them in 10 hours. One more example of problem, reaction, solution, then I'm going to get into what happened on September 11th, ladies and gentlemen. Government-sponsored and controlled terrorism to scare you into accepting tyranny, to scare you into accepting a total police state and the federal takeover of local governments and troops on the streets, as you're going to see from mainstream news. Of course, you say, well, if mainstream's lying. Well, they don't really lie. They just throw it in your face and spin it, tell you how good all this tyranny is. Back in 1962, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, headed by L.L. Lemitzer, wanted to blow up ships. They said again, like we did the Maine, incredible, declassified, confirmed document. ABC News and Baltimore Sun reported on it back in April and May of 2001, right before September 11th. They didn't report on it after, though. The U.S. government had a plan, the government, to blow up its own ships, to bomb Washington, D.C., to bomb the Capitol, to hijack jets full of Americans and crash them, to kill astronauts in space. John Glenn, they actually list him, let him die in space, attack Marines at Guantanamo Bay using Army Special Forces, Rangers, paratroopers dressed up like Cubans. Same system over and over again, as a pretext for war with Cuba and the Soviet Union and for a domestic police state crackdown. The Northwoods document. And they say casualty list in U.S. newspapers would cause a helpful wave of indignation. What more do you need?